Sleep came in fragments that night, broken pieces of unconsciousness interrupted by the awareness of Jamie's presence on my couch, and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring answers I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. Every time I started to drift off, my mind would conjure images of that pale face in the window, those dark eyes that seemed to see everything, the careful way the curtain moved, as if the person behind it had practiced the motion hundreds of times. By dawn, I was exhausted but alert. Jamie was already awake when I emerged from my small bedroom area, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, staring across the alley at the building that had become the center of my nightmares. The sound echoed in the narrow hallway like gunshots. We waited, barely breathing, for some response. Nothing. Jamie knocked again, louder this time. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Still nothing, but I could swear I heard something, a soft scraping sound, like furniture being moved across a floor. "We know you're in there," I called out, my voice shakier than I intended. "I live across the alley. I just want to talk." The silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive. Then, finally, a voice from the other side of the door. "Go away." It was a man's voice, older, rough from years of smoking, but there was something else in it, something that made my skin crawl, a quality I couldn't quite identify, but that set every nerve ending on alert. "I just want to know why you've been watching me," I said, trying to keep my tone calm and reasonable. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to understand." A long pause. Then, "I don't know what you're talking about." But even as he said it, I heard that scraping sound again, as if he was moving something or someone away from the door. "Please," I said, "just talk to me. 5 minutes, that's all I ask." Another pause. Then the sound of multiple locks being undone. The door opened just a crack, revealing a thin slice of a pale face and one dark eye that seemed to bore into me with uncomfortable intensity. 5 minutes, the voice said. "Then you leave, both of you." The door opened wider, revealing a man in his 50s or 60s, gaunt and hollow-cheeked, wearing clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. But it was his eyes that held my attention. They were the eyes of someone who had spent too much time alone, too much time thinking thoughts that normal people didn't think. Behind him, the apartment was a monument to obsession. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all taken with a telephoto lens from across the alley. Pictures of me coming home from work, pictures of me cooking dinner, pictures of me sleeping somehow through my window in moments when I must have forgotten to close the curtains completely. But it was worse than that. There were photos of other people too, other windows, other lives that this man had documented and catalogued and studied. Men, women, children, all captured in their most private moments, all unaware they were being watched. In the center of the room sat a single metal folding chair, positioned directly in front of the window that faced my apartment. Next to it, a small table covered with notebooks, pens, a pair of expensive binoculars, and what looked like a schedule written in the same shaky handwriting as the note that I had received. My schedule, my routine, every detail of my life reduced to times and dates and behavioral patterns. "Jesus Christ!" Jamie whispered behind me. The man smiled, revealing teeth stained brown from tobacco and neglect. "You wanted to understand. This is understanding. This is connection. This is intimacy. This is stalking," I managed to say, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. "Stalking implies intent to harm," he replied, as if he had given this explanation before. "I don't want to hurt you, any of you. I just want to know you, to be part of your lives, to share in your experiences." He gestured toward the photographs on the walls, admiring his collection like an art dealer showing off masterpieces. "Each person is different. Each routine is unique, but patterns emerge. Human nature, it's more predictable than people want to admit." "What do you want from us?" Jamie demanded. He turned back to face us, and for the first time his expression showed something like genuine emotion. Loneliness. Desperate, aching loneliness that had twisted into something dark and predatory. "I just want to be part of something, to matter to someone, to be included." "This isn't inclusion," I said. "This is terrorism. You're terrorizing innocent people." "Innocent," he repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. "No one is innocent. Everyone has secrets. Everyone does things they're ashamed of when they think no one is looking. I just look." The conversation was making me physically ill. This man, this broken, dangerous person, had been watching me for months, documenting my life, treating my privacy as his entertainment. But worse than that, he was clearly escalating. The note had been just the beginning. If we hadn't confronted him, what would come next? "We're leaving," I said, grabbing Jamie's arm, "and you're going to stop watching me. Stop watching everyone. This ends now." His expression changed again, the mask of false reasonableness falling away to reveal something much darker underneath. "I don't think so," he said softly. I think you've made this much more complicated than it needed to be." The way he said it, The tone in his voice sent ice water through my veins. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. Jamie must have sensed it too, because she was already backing toward the door, pulling me with her. "We're calling the police," she said. The man nodded, as if he had expected this. "You do that. Tell them about the photographs. Tell them about the watching. Tell them how scared you are of someone who's never threatened you, never touched you, never done anything but pay attention to your life." He was right, and we all knew it. The photographs, disturbing as they were, had been taken from a public space, through windows that faced a public alley. The watching, however creepy, wasn't necessarily illegal. Even entering my building, if ye had somehow obtained a key, might not constitute breaking and entering. "But now," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "now you've been here. Now you've seen my work. Now you know how much I care about you, about all of you." The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Our confrontation hadn't ended his obsession. It had escalated it. We ran. Down the stairs, through the lobby, out into the alley where sunlight felt like salvation after the darkness of that horrible room. We didn't stop running until we reached my apartment, climbed the 3 flights to my apartment, and locked the deadbolt behind us. But even then, even with solid walls and a good lock between us and that man, I didn't feel safe. Because he was right about one thing. He did know me, knew my routines, my habits, my weaknesses. And now, thanks to our confrontation, he knew that I knew about him, which meant the game, whatever sick game he had been playing, had just entered a new and more dangerous phase. The police came that afternoon. 2 officers who listened to our story with expressions that shifted from professional interest to barely concealed skepticism. Detective Martinez, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and the manner of someone who had seen too much, took notes while her partner, Officer Chen, examined the photographs we had taken of the wall in the man's apartment. "These are definitely invasive," Detective Martinez said when we finished our account. "But proving criminal activity, that's going to be challenging." "He's been stalking multiple people for years. Those photographs were taken from what appears to be his own residence, looking through windows visible from a public space," Officer Chen interrupted. "Without evidence of trespassing on private property, without proof of direct threats or harassment." "He left a note on my door. That's harassment." "A note that said, 'Hey,' which, however unsettling in context, doesn't constitute a legal threat." I felt the familiar frustration rising in my chest, the same helplessness I'd experienced during my first police report. This man had turned my life into a horror show, but because he'd been careful to stay just on the legal side of the line, there was little the authorities could do. "What about entering my building without permission?" I asked. He admitted to having access to keys, to finding ways into buildings. "Did you see him enter your building illegally?" "No, but did he admit to making unauthorized copies of keys?" "Not exactly, but he implied." Detective Martinez closed her notebook. "Here's what we can do," she said. "We'll file a report. We'll do a wellness check on the individual in question, make sure he's not a danger to himself or others, and we'll increase patrols in this area for the next few weeks." "That's it?" Jamie asked. "Unless he makes a direct threat or commits a verifiable crime, yes, that's it." After they left, Jamie and I sat in my apartment trying to process what had happened. The confrontation that was supposed to bring resolution had only made things worse. Now, not only did I know that someone was watching me, but they knew that I knew, and they had made it clear that our interference was unwelcome. "You can't stay here," Jamie said for the third time that day. "I can't afford to leave," I replied for the third time. "And besides, running away doesn't solve anything. He's watching other people too, other families. What about them?" "What about them? You're not responsible for every person in the city." But I felt responsible, at least partially. If I ran, if I simply disappeared from his field of vision, wouldn't he just focus more intensely on his other victims? And what if his next target was less fortunate than me, less able to defend themselves, less likely to have friends willing to help? That night, I made a decision that Jamie thought was insane. I was going to stay. I was going to maintain my routine, and I was going to document everything the man did, every movement, every sign of escalation, until I had enough evidence to convince the police to take action. "That's not bravery," Jamie said when I explained my plan. "That's stupidity. You're making yourself bait." "Maybe," I admitted, "but at least it's doing something instead of just being afraid." Jamie shook her head but agreed to help. We set up a camera system, borrowed equipment from a friend who worked in security, positioned to record both my apartment and the window across the alley. If the man was going to watch me, then I was going to watch him watching me. The first few days were almost anticlimactically normal. I maintained my regular schedule, came home at the usual times, turned on the lights as I always had, and like clockwork, the curtain across the alley would move, the pale face would appear, the observation would continue. But now, instead of feeling helpless, I felt like I was gathering intelligence. Every movement was recorded. Every pattern was documented. Slowly, methodically, I was building a case. Then, on a Thursday night, everything changed. I came home from work around 3 in the morning, exhausted from a particularly busy shift. Climbed the stairs, unlocked my door, reached for the light switch. The apartment was wrong. Not obviously different, nothing missing or obviously disturbed, but there was a feeling, a presence, as if the air itself had been touched by someone who didn't belong. I turned on the lights and immediately looked toward the window across the alley. The curtain was open, wide open, not the usual brief parting, but fully drawn back to reveal the entire window. And standing there, clearly visible, was the man from the abandoned building. He wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't being subtle or secretive. He was standing in full view, staring directly at my apartment, holding something in his hands. A sign, a piece of cardboard with words written in that same shaky handwriting. I was here. My legs nearly gave out. He had been inside my apartment while I was at work, while I thought I was safe behind my new deadbolt and security measures. He had somehow gotten in. I grabbed my phone and called 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers. 911, what's your emergency? Someone broke into my apartment, I said, my voice cracking with fear. He's standing in the window across the alley holding a sign that says he was here. Are you in immediate danger? Is the intruder still in your residence? No, he's across the alley. But he was here. He was inside. The dispatcher took my information and promised to send officers immediately. While I waited, I kept staring at that window across the alley, at that horrible man holding his horrible sign, letting me know that my home was no longer safe. Then, as I watched, he raised his other hand. In it, he held something else, something small and personal that I recognized immediately. My spare key. The one I kept hidden in a magnetic box behind my refrigerator for emergencies. He had been inside, had searched through my things, had found my most carefully hidden security measure and taken it as a trophy. And now he was showing it to me, letting me know that locks and deadbolts and security cameras meant nothing to someone who was patient enough, determined enough, obsessed enough to find a way in. The police arrived within minutes, but by then the window across the alley was dark again. The man was gone. Only the open curtains remained, fluttering in the night breeze like a flag of surrender. We'll increase patrols, Detective Martinez promised when she arrived to take my statement. But we all knew that restraining orders were just pieces of paper, and patrol cars couldn't be everywhere at once. That man across the alley, that watcher, that violator of privacy and peace of mind, had made his point. I was not safe. Not in my apartment. Not anywhere. And he wanted me to know it.
Didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. Every sound in the building became a potential threat. Every creak of settling wood, every footstep in the hallway, every car door slamming in the alley below, all of it filtered through the lens of knowing that someone had been inside my apartment. Someone who could apparently come and go as he pleased, despite locks and security measures and the watchful presence of patrol cars. Jamie stayed with me for 3 days, sleeping on my couch, taking shifts, staying awake to watch the window across the alley. But she had her own life, her own job, her own responsibilities. She couldn't be my bodyguard forever. "This can't go on," she said on Sunday morning, exhaustion clear in her voice. "You have to leave, or he has to be arrested. But this limbo, it's going to drive you insane."
She was right. I could feel my sanity fraying at the edges, pulled thin by constant vigilance and the knowledge that someone was out there, watching, waiting, planning whatever came next in his Sith game. The restraining order had been approved, a legal document requiring the man to stay at least 200 feet away from me, from my apartment, from my workplace. But serving the order required finding him, and when police had returned to the abandoned building across the alley, they found it empty. He was gone. The room with its wall of photographs, the metal chair positioned by the window, the notebooks full of observations and schedules, all of it had vanished as if it had never existed. But I knew he hadn't gone far, could feel his presence like a weight pressing down on my consciousness. The curtains in that window across the alley remained open, a taunt, a reminder that he was still out there somewhere, still watching, still planning. And then, on Monday night, he made his final move. I came home from work at my usual time, tired and paranoid and jumpy from nearly a week of constant fear. Climbed the stairs, noting absently that the hallway light was out again, reached my door in near darkness. Something was different. My door, which I always locked carefully with both the regular lock and the deadbolt, stood slightly ajar. Not wide open, just not quite closed. Exactly as it had been that first night, when I'd thought perhaps I'd simply forgotten to lock it properly. But I knew better now. Knew that nothing about this situation was accidental or coincidental. I pulled out my phone, finger hovering over the 911 button, and pushed the door open. My apartment was dark, silent, but not empty. I could sense a presence, could feel that someone was inside, waiting in the darkness like a spider in its web. I reached for the light switch, the same motion I had made hundreds of times, the signal that had started this whole nightmare. The lights came on, and there, in my single chair, positioned so he could see both my door and the window across the alley, was the man who had been watching me for months. Up close, in the harsh fluorescent light of my apartment, he looked even more disturbing than he had in that glimpse through his own window. His clothes were dirty and ill-fitting. His hair was greasy and unkempt. His skin had the pale, unhealthy quality of someone who spent too much time indoors. But his eyes were the ones that held me frozen in the doorway. Dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Eyes that had spent too much time looking at things they shouldn't see, thinking thoughts they shouldn't think. "Hello," he said, his voice calm and conversational, as if we were old friends meeting for coffee. I thought it was time we had a proper conversation. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. This man, this predator, was inside my home, my sanctuary, the one place where I should have been safe from his obsession. "You've caused me quite a lot of trouble," he continued, not moving from my chair, not making any threatening gestures, but somehow radiating menace like heat from a fire. The police visits, the questions, having to relocate my equipment. It's been inconvenient. "Get out," I managed to whisper. He smiled, that horrible brown-toothed grin I remembered from our first meeting. "I don't think so. We have things to discuss, boundaries to establish, an understanding to reach." "I called the police," I lied. "They're on their way." "No," he said simply. "You didn't. If you had, you'd still be talking to them, or you'd have run away instead of coming inside. But you're curious, aren't you? You want to know what I want, what this has all been leading to." He was right, and I hated that he was right. Despite my terror, despite every instinct screaming at me to flee, I was curious. This man had upended my life, had made me afraid in my own home, had violated my privacy in the most fundamental way possible. I wanted to understand why. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Connection," he said simply. "Understanding, intimacy, all the things that normal people take for granted, but that people like me, people who don't fit into society's neat little boxes, have to find in other ways. Watching people without their consent isn't intimacy, it's violation." "Is it?" He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving mine. "You know more about me than anyone else in your life. I know how you move when you think no one is looking. I know what you eat when you're sad. I know the face you make when you're trying not to cry. If that's not intimacy, then what is?" "It's stalking," I said, finding some strength in anger. "It's sick. It's criminal." "Criminal," he repeated, tasting the word. Such a harsh judgment for someone who simply cares enough to pay attention. He stood up, slowly, deliberately, and I tensed to run, but he didn't move toward me. Instead, he walked to my window, the same window I had looked through hundreds of times to see his curtain twitch across the alley. I've been watching that building for 3 years. So many windows, so many lives, so many stories. But you were different. You had a routine, a predictability. You were reliable. So you decided to terrorize me? I decided to include you in something bigger than yourself, to make you part of a community you didn't even know existed. He gestured toward the darkness across the alley. There are others like me in cities all over the country, all over the world. People who watch, who document, who preserve the small, private moments that make up a human life. We're anthropologists, sociologists, archivists,
of the mundane.
"You're predators," I said. His expression hardened.
We're the only ones who truly see. The only ones who pay attention. The only ones who care enough to really look. He turned away from the window and faced me again. But you've disrupted that. You've made it personal, messy, and that can't continue.
The threat in his words was unmistakable. This wasn't just about watching anymore. This had become about control, about power, about what happened to people who refused to play their assigned role in his sick fantasy. "What do you want from me?" I asked again.
I want you to understand, he said, moving closer, close enough that I could smell the stale cigarettes on his clothes, the unwashed odor of someone who had given up on normal social conventions. I want you to see that this watching, this documenting, it's not malicious. It's loving in its way.
"That's not love," I said. "That's obsession."
Is there a difference? Really? When you care about someone enough to learn everything about them, to dedicate your time to understanding their patterns, their needs, their secret selves, how is that different from love?
Because love requires consent. Love requires reciprocity. Love requires nothing, he interrupted. Love simply is. And my love for you, for all of you, is pure, uncomplicated, unconditional. He was insane. Not just dangerous, not just criminal, but completely detached from reality. In his mind, his stalking was affection. His violations were intimacy. His terrorism was love, which made him infinitely more dangerous than a simple predator. "I'm leaving here," I said, backing toward the door. "I'm moving away from here. You'll never see me again."
"No," he said softly, but with absolute certainty. "You're not. Because leaving would mean abandoning all the others I watch. All the people who depend on me, who need me, even if they don't realize it yet. And you're not the kind of person who abandons innocent people to danger." He was right again. And again I hated that he was right. How could I run away knowing that this man, this watcher, this violator of privacy and destroyer of peace was still out there, still watching other families, still escalating his obsessions, still moving toward whatever horrible conclusion his sick mind was planning? "Besides," he continued, "where would you go? How far would you run? I've been doing this for years. I know how to find people, how to watch without being seen, how to become part of someone's life whether they want me there or not." He smiled again. That horrible expression that contained no warmth or joy, only the satisfaction of a predator who knew his prey was trapped.
"This is your home now," he said. "This is where you belong, with me, part of my collection, part of my family." And that was when I realized that running away had never been an option. This man, this watcher, this violator of privacy and destroyer of peace wasn't going to let me go, ever.
The moment of realization, the understanding that I was trapped in this man's sick fantasy with no hope of escape, should have filled me with despair. Instead, it filled me with rage. This person had taken my home, my safety, my peace of mind, had turned my life into a horror show for his entertainment, had made me afraid to turn on lights in my own apartment, afraid to move freely in my own space, afraid to exist without the weight of unseen eyes cataloging my every action. And now he was telling me that this was permanent, that I belonged to him, that I was part of his collection like some butterfly pinned to a board. No. I had spent months being afraid, months being reactive, months letting this man dictate the terms of my existence. That ended now. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice steady for the first time since this nightmare began. "I'm not the kind of person who abandons innocent people to danger." His smile widened, pleased with what he interpreted as surrender. "But that doesn't mean I'm going to be your victim forever. I'm going to stop you." His expression shifted, confusion replacing satisfaction. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You're a predator. You prey on people's privacy, their vulnerability, their assumption that they're safe in their own homes. You violate boundaries and call it love. You commit crimes and call it art. You terrorize innocent people and tell yourself it's affection." I took a step toward him, then another. He backed away slightly, clearly not expecting this response. "But you made one mistake. You chose the wrong victim." "You can't..." "Can't what? Can't fight back? Can't refuse to play your game? Can't decide that I'd rather risk everything than live in fear?" I pulled out my phone, but not to call the police. Instead, I opened the camera app and began recording. "Tell me your name," I said, holding the phone steady, capturing his face, his voice, his presence in my apartment. "Stop," he said, raising his hand to block the camera. "Tell me how long you've been doing this, how many people you've watched, how many homes you've violated, how many lives you've destroyed for your entertainment.
You don't understand what you're doing, he said, his voice losing its calm conversational tone, becoming urgent, desperate. I understand exactly what I'm doing, I replied. I'm documenting. I'm creating evidence. I'm making sure that when the police find your body, they'll know exactly who you were and what you did. My body? His face went pale. Did you think this was going to end with you walking away? Did you think you could terrorize me for months, violate my home, threaten my life, and then just leave? Did you think I would let you go find new victims to torment? I saw the exact moment when he realized that the dynamic had shifted, when he understood that he was no longer the predator in this room. He ran toward the door, moving faster than his thin frame seemed capable of. But I was ready for that response. The baseball bat I kept beside my door, ostensibly for protection, but really just a comforting presence, was in my hands before he reached the hallway. The first swing caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around, sending him crashing into the wall. He cried out, a sound of pain and shock and the beginning of understanding that this wasn't going to end the way he had planned. "Please," he gasped, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor, holding his injured shoulder. "You don't have to." "Don't have to what?" I asked, standing over him with the bat raised. "Don't have to protect myself? Don't have to make sure you never hurt anyone else? Don't have to end this nightmare you created?" "I never hurt anyone," he pleaded. "I just watched. I just looked." "You destroyed lives," I said. "You stole privacy. You made people afraid in their own homes. You turned existence into performance. You made me afraid to turn on lights in my own apartment." The bat came down again, this time across his legs. He screamed, a sound that echoed in the narrow hallway like the cry of something dying. "Stop!" he begged. "Please, I'll leave. I'll never come back. I'll stop watching. I promise." "You're right," I said, raising the bat again. "You will stop watching, permanently." The third swing was to his head. After that, he stopped making noise. I stood in my hallway, breathing heavily, looking down at the broken body of the man who had terrorized me for months. Blood pooled beneath his skull, dark and thick in the harsh fluorescent light. I felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse, no horror at what I had done. Only relief. Clean, pure relief that the nightmare was finally over. I called 911. 911, what's your emergency?" "Someone broke into my apartment," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I defended myself. He's dead." The rest was procedure. Police, paramedics, detectives, crime scene technicians, hours of questions, statements, evidence collection. But I had been documenting this man's harassment for weeks, had security footage, had police reports, had a clear pattern of escalating stalking behavior that culminated in him breaking into my home. Self-defense, clear and simple. The investigation took 3 days. When it was over, Detective Martinez came to see me one final time. We found his real apartment 2 blocks from here. It was disturbing. Photographs of dozens of people, schedules, personal information he'd gathered somehow, evidence that he'd been inside multiple residences without permission. She paused, studying my face. There were also plans, detailed plans for what he called closer contact with his subjects, starting with you. I nodded, unsurprised. I had sensed that he was building toward something. The watching had been just the beginning. You probably saved lives, Detective Martinez continued. Not just your own, others he was planning to escalate with. I know, I said simply. She left, and I was alone in my apartment for the first time in months, without the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. I walked to my window, the same window that had been the center of so much terror, and looked across the alley at the abandoned building. The windows were dark, still, empty. No curtains twitching, no pale faces peering through the glass, no sense of being observed, catalogued, hunted. Just silence, just peace, just the knowledge that some monsters can only be stopped by becoming something monstrous yourself. I turned away from the window, walked to my kitchen, and made dinner. For the first time in months, I ate without feeling like I was performing for an audience. It was the most peaceful meal of my life.
"6 months later, I still live in the same apartment. Jamie thinks I'm crazy. The landlord offered to let me break my lease without penalty after what happened. The City Victim Services Department provided resources for relocation assistance. Everyone expected me to run, to flee to some place where the memories wouldn't follow. But I refused to leave. This is my home, my space, my life. I wasn't going to let a dead predator drive me away from it. I did make some changes, of course. Better locks, a security system, motion sensors that alert my phone if anyone approaches my door, practical precautions that don't interfere with normal life but provide early warning if something abnormal happens. The building across the alley was sold to a development company. They're converting it to condominiums, bright, modern, safe.
the windows that once held such menace now show the warm glow of families cooking dinner, children playing, couples watching television together. Normal life. The kind of life that predator had tried to steal from so many people. Sometimes, late at night, when I come home from work, I catch myself looking across the alley at those windows, not with fear, but with something like satisfaction. The knowledge that where once darkness and violation had lived, now there was light and normalcy and the comfortable privacy that everyone deserves. The police never found evidence of other victims coming forward to report harassment. Either this man had been more careful with his previous targets, or they had been too afraid to speak up, or they simply hadn't realized they were being watched. I prefer not to think about that too much. What matters is that it's over. The watching has stopped. The violation has ended. The fear that had poisoned my life for so many months is gone, replaced by the calm certainty that I can protect myself and my home from whatever darkness might come looking for me. I sleep well now, dreamless sleep, uninterrupted by paranoia or the sensation of unseen eyes. My routines are my own again, chosen by me, performed for no audience except myself. And late at night, when I turn on the lights in my apartment, I don't look across the alley to see if anyone is watching, because I know they're not. I made sure of that. Forever. The end. Anything? I asked. She shook her head. All quiet. Both windows, dark and light. Nothing moving. We made breakfast, though neither of us had much appetite. The plan was simple. Walk across the alley, find a way into the building, locate the apartment where my watcher lived, and confront them directly. It sounded reasonable in daylight, safe even. What could one person do against two of us in broad daylight, in a public space? But I knew, deep in that primitive part of my brain that had kept humans alive for thousands of years, that this person was dangerous. You don't watch someone for weeks, document their routine, leave cryptic notes, unless you're planning something. The question was, what? At 10 o'clock in the morning, we left my apartment and walked downstairs to the street level. The alley was even narrower than it looked from above, barely wide enough for a small car, lined with dumpsters and fire escapes and the accumulated debris of urban life. The building across from mine stood like a mirror image. Same red brick, same narrow windows, Same general state of tired decay. But up close I could see differences. The front door was slightly ajar. Several windows on the ground floor were broken or boarded up. Graffiti marked the walls in places my building had stayed clean. Looks like it's abandoned, Jamie observed. My landlord said the owner was trying to sell it, I told her. Most units don't have power. We approached the front entrance cautiously. The door, heavy wood, painted green decades ago, hung slightly open on its hinges. A chain and padlock secured it, but not tightly enough for someone to slip through the gap. Should we call the police? Jamie asked. And tell them what? That we're investigating trespassing by trespassing ourselves? She had a point. We were about to enter a building without permission, to confront someone who might not have committed any actual crimes. Not exactly legal high ground. But I was tired of being afraid, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of feeling hunted in my own home. I squeezed through the gap in the door, Jamie close behind me. The lobby was a study of decay. Broken tiles scattered the floor. The mailboxes had been pried open, doors hanging at odd angles like broken teeth. Water stains marked the walls where pipes had leaked and never been repaired. But there were signs of recent presence, footprints in the dust, fresh scratches on the floor where something heavy had been dragged, the smell of cigarettes, recent ones, not just the stale odor of decades-old smoke. A staircase led to the upper floors, its banister loose and unsteady. But we had come this far. We had to see it through. We climbed slowly, testing each step, listening for any sound that might indicate we weren't alone. The building was silent except for the small noises we made, the creak of old wood, the whisper of our breathing, the rapid beat of my heart that seemed loud enough to echo in the empty halls. The second floor was a maze of narrow corridors and closed doors. Most of the apartment numbers had fallen off or been removed, leaving only the ghostly outlines of where they had once hung. But I had spent enough time looking at this building from across the alley to have a rough idea of the layout. My watcher's window would be that way, third door on the right. We approached it carefully, Jamie staying slightly behind me, both of us ready to run if necessary. The door was unmarked, painted the same institutional green as everything else in the building, but unlike the others we had passed, this one showed signs of regular use. The doorknob was cleaner. The area around the lock showed recent scratches from keys, and most tellingly, a thin line of light shone beneath the door. Someone was inside. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. What would I say? How do you confront someone about watching you without sounding paranoid or accusatory? Jamie took the decision away from me by rapping sharply on the door with her knuckles.